So many years ago, when I was involved with the S100 computers project and active in the N8 VEM community, I built up a bunch of S100 hardware, and these three switching power supplies I believe are the ones that came out of how I powered that hardware. There's a 7.5 volt 40 amp here that I think I was able to adjust up to about 8.5 volts, and these were plus and minus 15 that I think I was able to tweak up closer to 16 as well, although that all that headroom isn't really needed. With the 7805 regulators on the various S100 cards, if you're dropping 10 volts in at an amp and you're drawing you're drawing an amp through the regulator, and you've got 10 volts in on one side of the regulator and 5 volts regulated on the other, that extra 5 volts gets dissipated as heat in the regulator. So there's a balance between having too high a voltage coming into the regulators and too low. If the raw DC side coming in to be regulated is too low, the regulator won't regulate and it'll oscillate and do all kinds of things or just shut down. If the voltage is too high, it creates a bunch of heat. And I think I determined for what I was doing at the time, about 8.5 volts gave me really solid 5 volt regulation. But we'll have to measure this. I don't even know if these are still functional, honestly. So I'm going to go ahead and just temporarily hook these up and apply power, and we'll see what we get. So green is, of course, earth ground. I believe in the US, white is neutral, as I recall, and black is the line. And again, this isn't permanent wiring. This is just enough to get these tested. Oh, that didn't work very well, did it? It didn't hold onto the wire. Must not have tightened it down enough. So that's got a good grip on all three. Let's bring him in here on 40 volts. You know, this being a 40 amp supply is a huge amount of current that can be drawn. So I'm just going to gently grab the meter leads. We're on 40 volts. And let's just see what we're getting out of this guy, assuming I don't have smoke and fire here. Of course, that assumes I can plug all the... This is an old line cord. So I've got it's outputting 8 volts. That's a little shy of the 8.5 or so I'd like, although it's probably very serviceable. See if I can tweak it up any higher than that. That screwdriver doesn't fit. Again, it's designed to be 7.5 volts. It's coming down. Now, the 8.06 is as hard as I can drive this. Now, I ran this for countless hours, adjusted up to 8 volts, powering other S100 hardware, never had an issue with it. So that'll give me, good enough for what I need to do there. Let this die down. There's no load on it, which is why it's taken a bit to come down. I think in the previous video, when I tried to power up the Altair 8800 CPU and front panel, I had all kinds of just weird issues with it coming up, and I think part of that was I'm using 2 different bench power supplies, or I was at that point, and they didn't sequence to come up and down together very well. I had one time when the CPU seemed to start execution. We could see the address lines were active, but I could never get it consistent, and I'm hoping with getting 3 power supplies here that are switched together, we can get the system to more reliably come up. I wasn't able to get a reset on that front panel to actually reset anything, and I don't know if I just have a assembly issue, electronics issue, power supply issues causing something to latch up, or whatever. I just don't know. So, oops. It would help if this lead would actually catch in here. You know, I have one other large switching supply I was looking at yesterday, and I forget the rating on it. So I'd be happy you're up and around 8.5 volts for that incoming. That gives me 2.5 volts overhead over the 5 volt regulators. Although 8 volts, well, 8 volts is still 3 volts above. 8 volts should actually work really well the more I think about this. 8 volts gross DC coming in, regulated down to 5, is 3 volts overhead. That's plenty for these regulators. And in this case, being 8 volts to a 7805 that's having 1 amp draw on it, it's dissipating 3 of those 8 volts through the regulator. That's 3 volts at 1 amp, that's 3 watts, where if we were at 10 volts coming in, it'd be 5 watts. This supply actually makes sense. So just kind of got to rethink this. So we are line, neutral, ground. This one should be, it is right at plus 15. Honestly, for the 12 volt rail, that is plenty. Again, there's 3 volts overhead there to the 12 volt regulators, which should be plenty. This becomes the same thing, you know, if I'm drawing an amp at 12 volts and I've got 15 volts coming in, once again I am dropping 3 volts across that voltage regulation circuit. And so, 3 volts times an amp, it's got to dissipate 3 watts someplace. So again, it becomes a concern. I think the actual S100 definitions are plus and minus 16 or plus and minus 18, something like that. It's been a long time, I don't remember. But 2 of the supplies check out. This is another 15 volt that gets used to generate either the plus or minus rail. When I get this towards the actual Altair case, I will probably look for a plus and minus 15 volt single switcher. So I'm not trying to feed or fit 3 largish power supplies in, especially when the current draw on the minus 12 is going to be minimal. Really just to generate minus 5 for components that need it, and for the minus drive on like an RS-232 driver, those kind of things. The plus 12 could see some load if I had floppy drives or a hard drive attached to it. I don't think that's ever going to be the case inside of that. Well, it won't be inside of that case. There's not room. But here's the 3rd supply. It should come up to around 15, and it does as well. So these still look like nice, viable supplies, which is a good thing. See, these saw a lot of usage for a lot of years and was involved in those projects. I think at this point I'm going to build up a wiring harness to turn this into plus 8 and plus and minus 15 to power up an S100 backplane. So that's really the next step here, is building up the required wiring harness. So I'll get some wirings and stuff together and we'll jump in and do that next. So here's where we're at. I've got the 3 switching power supplies all hooked up to the same common incoming power. I've used a couple of connectors here. So this is bringing out the plus and minus 15, and this guy brings out the plus 8 on the 2 ends. They made into these matching connectors here. Notice that I have male on one side and female on the other, so I can't get them in wrong. I should be able to plug these together. And that goes the other way around. And switch the slider back, or the switchers back out of the way here. And I should be able to apply power. And if I've got this right, on pin 1 and 51 over here I have plus 8. On pin 2 I should have plus 15. And on pin 52 I should have minus 15. And that should be the power supply rails that are needed by the board, or the boards. So to test this, I'm going to go ahead and pull the 8080 out and the 8212 out. That way they're isolated in case I've got this wrong and I end up with the wrong voltages. I don't want to damage those two chips. The TTL logic should be fine. The board should go in like that. Let me get hooked up to a good ground reference here. Leads, as always, are all tangled up. Leads are always tangled up. Who here's a good ground? Looks like this up here should be a good ground. If I can clip into it. I should see -5 here. We're just going to connect for a second. And I don't. It was -5 over here. There it is. Should see -5 and +12. And there should be 5 volts going to the logic. And there is. So let's see. On the 8080, let's just triple check here. Pin 11 should be -5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Should be at -5, and it is. 28 should be at +12. 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Am I off by 1? There it is. And pin 20 should be +5. So it looks like we've got the power supply sorted out, at least that far. These supplies should all come up and down pretty much together. So I think we're safe at this point to reinsert the processor. The assembly of this has just been bringing all the grounds down here together. A couple heavy wires for the this orange nail to deliver the +8, and these lighter wires here, the plus and -15. I did temporarily stick some feet underneath just to hold this up so it doesn't short down on bits of wire or whatever. We need to reinsert these ICs. We've got the front panel interface. And a slot back here. I don't know if this will have any better chance of powering up and attempting to function or not versus what we saw on the bench supplies where I couldn't sequence them well. I think it's connected to there. I think I'm going to rebuild this cable. It's awfully stiff. I don't like how stiff it is. I've actually got enough length here to rearrange this a bit. As I recall, pin 1's over on that side. Let's pick up the front panel again. Take the bubble wrap off. I'm using to protect it. And we'll do a quick it saw reset. let's do stop, and run isn't working. Reset. So the processor is coming up and running. At least that's more reliable. And based on the these addresses up here, I'd say the CPU is running and doing something. The system's got no memory in it. I don't know why run stop doesn't work. Lack of RAM in the system shouldn't make a difference. It's certainly seeing the reset. So I've got something someplace, obviously not working well. I wonder what the issue is. It's basically stuck running. Trying to think where to go next with this. I have to take a look at the schematic. But at least it powered up in a clean state. Let me pull the power again and let the switchers discharge. Bring it back up. You have to manually reset. Yeah, run stop. Well, it does see reset, and that gets it running. It's progress, but not as much as I'd like. I'd really liking to have got control here. I really shouldn't need any RAM in the system. At this point, I mean, if it's there, I could read and write from it, but I can't get the system to stop. Which definitely gets into there's something just not right. Well, I'm going to go off, take a peek at the schematics, and I'll be back.